Hi everyone, welcome to the, oops, I gotta share my screen. Hi everyone, welcome to the St. Barnabas Family Caregiver Program Education and Training session for this week. First, I'd like to introduce the Family Caregiver Support Keeper team. Amy Blackburn, our program manager, Olga Yamiwaki, another case manager, and myself, case manager, Michelle McGuire. I'll tell you a little bit about our program. The Family Caregiver Support Program is located within the St. Barnabas Senior Services Center and is sponsored by the City of Los Angeles Department of Aging. We provide support for family caregivers in the form of respite relief, assistance with emergency needs, support, education, and training. The presentation this week is on the emotional side of caregiving. This is taken from an article by Donna Schimpf and LCSW, and I've put the link down here if anybody would like to find the original article. So all kinds of emotions surface when a person becomes a family caregiver. A lot of those emotions you feel immediately. Some of them will form gradually over time. They'll come and go. And they'll be both positive and negative emotions. And before I get into the common negative emotions or uncomfortable emotions, which is what this presentation is really going to focus on, I want to just touch base briefly on the common positive emotions that arise from caregiving. And here's a quote: "When we provide help to someone we care about, we feel more positive emotions." And it's true. We feel compassion, such as empathy and concern for our loved ones, and we feel satisfaction knowing that that the best care is being given to our loved ones and they're being taken care of in the correct way. And you can have pride in yourself for doing what's right, doing the right thing, being a good daughter, son, uncle, friend, whatever. And this information comes from an article by Michael Poulin from the University of Buffalo. So again, a lot of very strong positive emotions come from caregiving, as caregivers themselves will tell you. Now, caregiving also involves a lot of negative, difficult, or uncomfortable emotions. And we can often be reluctant to express them, or we don't know how. But as we all know, it's important to process or express all of our emotions, good and bad. Bottling up emotions, trying to hold them in, or trying to deny them or avoid them usually results in poor sleep, illness, trouble coping, stress eating, substance abuse, other ways that we try to deal with the feelings, or other ways that they're trying to get out and be expressed if you will not be aware of them. So it's important to manage our emotions in healthy ways and express them so that we can deal with the emotions, process them, so avoid them coming out in these maladaptive ways. So what I'm going to do now is go through some of the common, often hard to deal with feelings that caregivers can experience, and then those are followed up by some suggestions for how you might better cope with those specific emotions or feelings. And this is a list of the emotions that I'm just going to briefly touch on: ambivalence, anger, anxiety, crankiness, disgust, embarrassment, fear, jealousy. You can read, it's a pretty good list here. So I'm going to touch on all these. Ambivalence: the feeling of both wanting to be doing what you're doing and the feeling of not wanting to be doing it. Now, on a bad day, you may feel like you didn't have to be there, you know, and you wish it would be over soon. On a good day, caring for someone can be a gift to both you and the care receiver. So how do you deal with feeling ambivalent? What do you do? Well, the suggestion is to allow yourself to feel both sets of feelings. Everyone has all these feelings sometimes. Neither the bad feelings or the good feelings will last forever. Anger. How often have you just lost it while providing care or felt like you were on your last nerve? Anger and frustration are a normal part of caregiving. Caring for someone with dementia can be even harder, as the care receiver can be irrational and combative. And it's not always possible to be in perfect control of your emotions. Anger and other emotions, they just come out sometimes, especially when we're tired, stressed, we haven't slept. And more coping with anger. Forgive yourself. That's the biggest thing. Realize that you're human. And again, you're just trying to work with what you got. You're doing the best you can. Maybe find constructive ways to express yourself, like take a walk away when you're angry, give yourself a timeout. Identify supportive people you can talk to. Maybe you can pick up the phone to vent about things that have happened that day or what's going on or how you can deal with it. Anxiety. Anxiety feels like things are just out of control and you don't know how to bring them back into control. And this can make you very anxious. It's kind of like a fear of the future in a way. Anxiety can often emerge as a short fuse, the impulse to run away, not sleeping, heart palpitations, the urge to cry. Anxiety can come out in a lot of different forms. Some ways to cope with anxiety. First, always awareness. Pay attention to anxiety. It's telling you something isn't right. When you feel anxious, when you are aware that you're anxious, you can try to stop, slow yourself down by taking deep breaths, and just keep breathing. Some people find that prayer or meditation helps, doing something relaxing like making some tea. Anything you can find that will give you a break from what's happening in the moment and let you kind of ground. That might help with anxiety. Boredom. It's easy to become bored when you're stuck at home taking care of someone else and not doing things that fulfill your own needs, or you're too tired to try. One way or some ways to cope with boredom is getting some respite. Get yourself a break. Go out and have some time for yourself, whether it be doing something fun or taking care of business that you need to take care of. Having time for yourself, giving yourself a break, refreshing yourself will increase your patience, increase your resilience, and give you a chance to do something meaningful for you. Again, such as socializing, going for a walk, or reading a book. Again, just having time for yourself to do whatever you want. Just that alone is helpful. Crankiness or irritability. When tired and stressed, it's harder to stay in control of things we say and feel. Feelings can go up and down very rapidly. We can lash out at the littlest things because we have no reserves. If you find yourself feeling cranky and irritable, as hard as it can be to find the time, make the time to take a break. Get some rest. We're all in less control of our emotions and ourselves when we're tired. And again, try to talk to someone if you can and maybe let off some steam. Depression and sadness. As a caregiver, you're at higher risk for depression than the general population. Sometimes this is a feeling of hopelessness or helplessness, the inability to sleep, or trouble getting up and facing the day. Sometimes you may just want to cry. Coping with depression, there's a lot of different ways to cope with depression. It's treatable and it should be taken seriously, even if it's mild depression. It can creep up on you and you can be depressed and not even realize that you're in a full-on depression. Lots of different ways to cope with depression. Mild depression, support groups are very helpful. Talking to others. Find a counselor or therapist who understands caregiving specifically. Ask for help. Exercise. Moving your body is a proven way to relieve some of the symptoms of depression, any kind of uncomfortable emotion. Move your body, moves that energy. And it may not get rid of it, but it may change it a little bit. And sometimes that can be enough for a little bit of relief. And again, you can talk to your physician about depression, but realize if you do this, they will probably want to give you some kind of medication because that's how physicians work. There's nothing wrong with medication, it's just not for everyone. Disgust. Having to help someone to the toilet can be a very intimate, too much of an intimate experience for some caregivers. If the care receiver is incontinent of stool as well as urine, then changing an adult diaper can be nauseating and repulsive. Having to clean the private body parts of someone like a parent can be unnerving and uncomfortable. Watching someone eat sloppily or not care for personal appearance or having to clean up vomit can also cause feelings of disgust. So it's very understandable and I would think very common that caregivers may encounter this. There are many ways to deal with bathroom and feeding problems. An occupational therapist can help you find tools and tricks to make mealtime easier. And there's a webinar on incontinence, moving beyond the leakages, practical strategies to manage incontinence. And that is on caregiver.org, and I've put the whole link here. Embarrassment. It's easy for us to feel responsible for the behavior of someone else and feel like it's our fault when things happen. Let's say the care receiver makes impolite comments when you're out in public, or makes a scene as you try to find the restroom right away, or refuses to bathe and now has some body odor. So ways to deal with the embarrassment. Have friends and family members or someone else accompany you when you go out with the care recipient so that you have some help. Let people in your environment know that your loved one can no longer control their behavior. You know, some people just stop leaving the house because it's a difficult problem to manage and it's just easier to stay home. And that may be fine, that may work for you, but if that's causing you to feel lonely or sad or depressed and cutting you off socially, or just cutting you off in any way, then that's not good. Fear. Caregivers take on a huge amount of responsibility, not only for the day-to-day care of the care recipient, but also for all the other things that might happen while being a caregiver. What if something happens? Will I be able to cope? Am I responsible for everything? Some ways to cope with fear when you get scared. It's often helpful to talk to someone who knows about your situation and can give you perspective and calm your fears. Think about how you would handle predictable emergencies based on what disabilities your care receiver has. And create backup plans where you can. Think about the things that you can control and see if there's anything that you can do to make plans or contingencies based on the things you can control. And the things that you can't control, you just have to find ways to accept if you can, if they cannot be changed. Frustration. Frustration is part of many other feelings, such as ambivalence, anger, and impatience. It may feel like you can't do anything right, or that things just don't go as planned, no matter what you do or how hard you try. Frustration may lead to stress eating, substance abuse, and a higher likelihood of losing your temper. And if you're tired, you're more likely to get frustrated. I've heard frustration described as your inability to reach a goal. And I like that definition. It's when you want something, you can't get there. Way to cope with frustration, here's some suggestions. Acknowledge how frustrating caregiving can be. Again, awareness. Sometimes if we just let ourselves be aware of what we're feeling, that can really help in processing it. Join a support group to learn the tricks that other caregivers have learned to make coping easier. Take breaks from caregiving so you have a chance to refresh your energy. Exercise and sleep. So you see, a lot of these are not all that different in how you process them. You know, being aware of them, maybe changing what you can about the situation to prevent them from happening again, exercising or finding some way to process the emotion, get it out of your body, taking a break, making sure that you're rested. These things are common themes with coping with these emotions. Grief, a normal and natural emotional reaction to loss, often including feelings of disappointment, sadness, anger, despair, fear, or guilt. Caregivers grieve for the care receiver, the person they used to know, their relationship with the care receiver, their plans, goals, or dreams for the future, for themselves, with the care recipient, with their family, everything. Caregivers, as well as everyone, we often need to grieve the losses we're experiencing on a daily basis, or it will come out as something else. Again, grief is another uncomfortable emotion, and we don't want to bottle it up. As difficult as it is to feel it, it's even more difficult to carry it around and not process it. Coping with grief, we tend to want to avoid the difficult emotions that come with grief, but allowing ourselves to feel it will help us heal. Reaching out to others for help and support. There are grief workshops, and there are grief counselors. Friends and family can be helpful. Not always. And here's a link for probably an article and some tips and tricks for dealing with grief and loss on caregiver.org right there. Guilt. Guilt is a feeling you have when you believe you've done something wrong. Caregivers can feel guilt about not having done enough to prevent their loved one from getting sick in the first place, feeling like they want the situation to end, having been impatient with the care recipient, maybe not doing enough for the care recipient or not doing a good enough job as a caregiver, and taking time for themselves. These are all things that can make caregivers feel guilty. I'm feeling guilty. Some good ways to deal with that. Forgive yourself. You know, it's impossible to be in control of how you feel. You know, uncomfortable feelings come up. You may not want to admit that you feel disgusted or that you're impatient or that you feel guilty. Forgive yourself for having those maybe less than perfect emotions. It's okay. Everybody does. Consider your expectations. Are you thinking things like no one will do as good a job as me and I can't leave the house? What if I leave and something happens? I'll never forgive myself. Well, you know, there's probably some truth in that, in both of those statements, but there might be some wiggle room too, you know. Maybe you can find someone who will take care of your mom just for 2 hours, as good as you do. Maybe you can leave just for a short period of time and nothing will happen. It's just things to consider. Change guilt into regret. This is called reframing. When you reframe something, look at it from a different perspective. I'm in a difficult situation and I have to make difficult decisions sometimes. I regret that I'm human and I get impatient sometimes. I'm doing the best I can, even though I get things wrong from time to time and I regret that I'm not perfect. Impatience. It's understandable that you get impatient at times. Even in the best situations, people get impatient. And caregiving is a very difficult, complex, stressful situation, at least it can be. How difficult is it to get your care receiver up in the morning? Up, dressed, given breakfast, and to their doctor's appointment all before 10 a.m. And you have other things to do. All this, and the care receiver is acting unhelpful and moving slowly, refusing to use his walker, doesn't want to eat or get dressed. Of course, anyone would feel impatient. Just reading through this list, reading through this scenario, increases my stress level. So dealing with impatience, as hard as it is, slow down. When you're tired and frustrated and you're trying to keep things under control, it's natural to want to speed up, but that's when you want to slow down. Leave a lot of time to accomplish tasks, a lot of time. Control the environment as much as you can, but no, you can't always prevent your father, for example, from taking off without his walker. Again, make a list of the things you can and cannot control in the situation. Jealousy. We often don't admit to feeling jealousy because most of us have been told we shouldn't feel it. That doesn't mean we don't feel it sometimes. We may feel jealous of those who have it easier or better than us. Maybe your friends, you're jealous of your friends who are able to go out and do things that you can no longer do. Maybe you're jealous of your siblings who are not doing their share to help. Maybe you're feeling jealous of a friend whose parent died quickly and easily while you're taking care of a parent who has had dementia for years. Or maybe there's someone who got a big inheritance while you're struggling to pay bills and be a good caregiver. You know, it's okay to admit being jealous. Things are not fair. Life is not fair. We often have flashes of resentment and envy at other people's good fortune compared to our own. Jealousy is a problem when we wallow in it, and it prevents us from enjoying the things we do have. So some ways to deal with jealousy are to try to focus on what you do have, whatever it may be, and work on feeling gratitude. Maybe create a gratitude list. Lack of appreciation. Caregivers may get their feelings hurt because the care receiver doesn't thank them or see how much they're giving up in order to care for them. The care receiver may push away our attempts to be helpful and caring, may not thank you or even see how much you are giving up on their behalf. Family or friends may be critical of you and your caregiving, or not recognize the time and effort involved in caregiving, or just not appreciate it. How to cope with this? Well, some suggestions. Sometimes you have to give yourself a pat on the back. Write in a journal about the things you do each day. Might help to appreciate how much you give and how much you do. Again, support groups, family and friends that will cheer you on. These can be comforting, which is necessary and important for caregivers. Loss. I touched on this briefly when we talked about grief, and it's similar. You grieve any loss. Caregivers experience many losses. Loss of control, loss of independence, loss of income, loss of your best friend, loss of the future, loss of a sense of yourself. Coping with loss can be difficult. Identifying your losses can help you cope with them. Significant loss involves grief, and you're going to need support as you grieve. For each of us, the losses and how we cope with them will be different. Everybody copes differently with loss. And I remember learning about loss, somebody saying that even missing a phone call is a level of loss. And there's just a little teeny grief process that goes through that. Oh, I missed my phone call. You feel bad and you process that grief. There's so much loss every day. And I think this is significant for caregivers to look at and to try to cope with. Identify it and see how much it's affecting you. So that was pretty much it. Those are the most common emotions, uncomfortable emotions found in caregiving, according to the woman that wrote the article. And again, here they are listed here. Totally normal, very common. And again, the best way to deal with most of them is to be aware of them and then try to process them somehow. Find yourself some support. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions or comments.
Thank you, Michelle. This was good. And I know for a fact a lot of our caregivers are feeling most of those emotions. And support groups, I think, help a lot. Even, you know, telling their stories, sharing each other's stories. And like you said, tips, a lot of caregivers, you know, offer tips on how to control some of those emotions, or, you know, this worked for me, why don't you try that? So it's great information.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's true. We offer our own support groups here, and talking to peers, you can hear it when they talk to each other, how helpful it can be just to have somebody acknowledge what you're going through.
Yeah, and you know, because sometimes caregivers feel like they're the only ones going through this. You know, it's just me and no one else in the world.
Right.
But when they're sharing each other's stories, they're like, oh yes, you know, I go through the same thing. This is what worked for me. And, you know, so I think finding support groups and being able to talk about the emotions and to vent about what's going on in their caregiving everyday lives.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we should talk, I think it's worth saying again. I mean, the support groups are the way to go. It's an excellent way to deal with the difficulties and the stress of caregiving. Yeah, you're right, Olga, because you do feel like you're all alone, but so many people are going through it. It's a huge number of people in our country that are caregiving right now for family in their homes. And yeah, if everybody could get together and know that they're not alone.
Yeah, finding just, you know, that support on each other as well, with each other, and just talking about their experiences. It helps a lot. I've noticed at the end of our support groups, you know, caregivers leave off feeling happy. You know, they got whatever they needed to get off their chest, and you know, they got some advice and somebody was there to listen.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes that's all they need.
Yeah.
Somebody just to be there to
Right.
listen to them.
Yeah. Change their perspective a little bit, or listen to them, or acknowledge them. Yeah. Or share their own story. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think you're right.
because most of them, like you mentioned on your PowerPoint too, they don't get acknowledged by, you know, their caregivers, or if they have siblings.
Yeah.
They're just like, well, why don't you, they get told how to do their job. They're like, well, why don't you try this instead? You know, if that's not working.
Right.
It can be frustrating for them.
Sure. Or, you know, they're told that that people can't help them. You know, no, I can't help. I don't have time. You know, I don't have resources, you know. Be sure, and don't forget to water the grass.
Yeah.
I have one client who likes to joke about things like that. She'll get calls from people who feel they're being supportive, but they pretty much just give her advice on really silly things like water the grass. Just like, you know, so.
Yeah, and they're like, the grass is like the last thing about it.
Exactly. Wow. Well, thank you, Olga, for joining. I appreciate your participation, your comments.
Thank you.
With this, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.